Every time you eat a meal, your blood sugar spikes. That is normal. That is biology. But after 60, the spike goes higher, stays elevated longer, and comes down more slowly, and every one of those extended spikes is quietly damaging your blood vessels, accelerating cognitive decline, feeding joint inflammation, and driving the metabolic dysfunction your doctor keeps watching on your lab results. Not because of what you are eating, not because of your weight, because of a specific, correctable change in how the aging body processes glucose that is being monitored, but almost certainly not addressed at its root. And there is a specific food, one food, eaten exactly 10 minutes before your main meals, that clinical research has shown reduces post-meal blood sugar spikes by up to 50% in adults over 60. 50%. In a peer-reviewed randomized controlled trial. Not from a prescription, not from a medication with a side effect list longer than the bottle, from a food you can buy at any grocery store for under $3. Stay with me until the very end of this video. I am going to name the food, explain exactly why it works at the biological level, and go through the 10 most important things you need to know about blood sugar after 60 that no one is telling you. Number 1 on this list will change how you understand the relationship between your blood sugar and your brain. Before we begin, I want to be clear. Everything I share here is educational information only, not medical advice. If you take medication for blood sugar or diabetes, please speak with your healthcare provider before making dietary changes. Blood sugar management requires individual medical oversight, and this information is meant to support those conversations, not replace them. I am Dr. Edward, and I have spent over 15 years specialized in senior health, working exclusively with adults over 60. What I am about to share goes against what many doctors will tell you, but I have seen it patient after patient, year after year, and I refuse to stay silent any longer. If your blood sugar has been creeping in the wrong direction, and no one has offered you anything more specific than eat less sugar and exercise more, subscribe to this channel right now. That advice is incomplete, and the complete version is what I publish every single week. Let me explain what is actually happening to your blood sugar after 60, because this is not a vague story about aging. It is 2 specific biological failures disrupting the normal glucose cycle simultaneously. When you eat a meal, carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. Glucose enters the bloodstream. The pancreas detects the rise and releases insulin. Insulin signals cells throughout the body to absorb the glucose. Blood sugar returns to normal. In a healthy young body, this cycle is fast, efficient, and complete. After 60, 2 specific mechanisms break this cycle. The first is insulin resistance. The cells of the body gradually become less responsive to insulin's signal. The same amount of insulin that moved glucose efficiently into cells at 35 is insufficient at 65. The pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, but eventually even elevated insulin cannot overcome the cellular resistance. Blood glucose stays elevated longer after every meal. Research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that insulin resistance affects an estimated 40 to 45% of adults over 65, even without a diabetes diagnosis. 40 to 45% without a diagnosis. Blood sugar management after 60 is not a diabetic problem, it is a universal aging problem. The second failure is the first phase insulin response. In a healthy pancreas, detecting rising blood glucose triggers an immediate rapid burst of insulin within the first 2 to 4 minutes of glucose entry. This first phase response is the brake that blunts the spike before it reaches dangerous heights. Research published in Diabetologia found that this first phase response declines by approximately 50% between ages 40 and 70. The brake is slower, weaker, and less effective. The spike reaches its peak before the brakes can fully engage. Together, these 2 failures mean that every meal after 60 produces a higher, longer spike than the same meal produced 20 years ago, and those spikes matter far more than most people realize. Research published in Diabetologia found that peak post-meal blood glucose was a stronger independent predictor of cardiovascular events in adults over 65 than fasting glucose, than HbA1c, than any of the standard measurements your doctor typically reviews. The spike is the damage, not the fasting number, the spike. Now I want to hear from you. Type in the comments right now. Do you check your blood sugar only fasting, or do you also check it after meals? Type fasting or post-meal. I am going to read every comment. The food is apple cider vinegar. 2 tablespoons diluted in 8 ounces of water, taken 10 minutes before your main meals. That is the protocol. And here is exactly why it works at the biological level. Apple cider vinegar's primary active compound is acetic acid. When acetic acid reaches the stomach before a meal, it activates 3 mechanisms simultaneously that directly address the 2 age-related failures I described. First, it inhibits amylase, the digestive enzyme responsible for breaking starch into glucose. When amylase activity is reduced, carbohydrates in the meal are digested more slowly. Glucose enters the bloodstream in a gradual measured stream rather than a rapid flood. The spike is blunted at its source before it even begins. Second, acetic acid activates a cellular transporter called GLUT4 in muscle cells through an AMP kinase pathway. This activation increases the rate at which muscle cells absorb glucose from the bloodstream independently of insulin. When GLUT4 is activated, glucose is cleared from the blood more rapidly, even when insulin resistance is present. The second failure, the resistant cells, is partially bypassed. Third, it slows gastric emptying. The rate at which the stomach releases its contents into the small intestine directly controls the speed of glucose absorption. Slower gastric emptying means glucose enters the blood over a longer window. Research published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition confirmed that pre-meal vinegar significantly reduced gastric emptying rate and directly correlated this reduction with lower peak blood glucose. A double-blind randomized controlled trial published in Diabetes Care followed adults with insulin resistance over 12 weeks. Participants who consumed apple cider vinegar before meals showed a 34% improvement in insulin sensitivity and post-meal glucose excursions, 50% lower than the placebo group, 50% lower in 12 weeks. A separate study from Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism found that in adults over 60 specifically, pre-meal ACV reduced the total 2-hour post-meal glucose exposure by 55% compared to no pre-meal intervention. 55% of the glucose spike over 2 hours. Gone. From 2 tablespoons before meals. Let us go through the 10 most important things to know about blood sugar after 60. Number 10. Your fasting blood glucose is the least important blood sugar number your doctor measures, and it is the only one most doctors check. Research in the British Medical Journal found that post-meal glucose spikes were a significantly stronger independent predictor of cardiovascular mortality in adults over 65 than either fasting glucose or HbA1c. You can have a perfectly normal fasting glucose and be spiking dangerously after every single meal. Many adults over 60 are, and they have no idea because no one has measured the number that shows it. The action: ask your doctor specifically for a 2-hour post-meal glucose test. The target for adults over 60 is below 140 milligrams per deciliter at 2 hours. If you are regularly above 140 after meals with a normal fasting number, you have post-meal dysregulation that your standard annual lab is completely missing. Number 9. Every post-meal spike above 140 milligrams per deciliter is directly damaging the lining of your blood vessels through a process called glycation. When glucose rises rapidly above that threshold, it reacts with proteins in the endothelial cell walls of your arteries. Those glycated proteins become stiffer, less elastic, and trigger inflammatory signals that initiate atherosclerotic change. Research published in Cardiovascular Diabetology found that even brief 1-hour glucose spikes above 140 caused measurable endothelial dysfunction and oxidative stress in the vessel walls of adults over 60 at levels that would not meet any clinical threshold for concern on a standard blood test. Every meal where the spike is blunted is a meal where this damage is reduced. Number 8. Post-meal blood sugar spikes are directly accelerating cognitive decline through a mechanism researchers now call type 3 diabetes. The brain is a glucose-dependent organ. Brain cells require insulin signaling to absorb glucose efficiently. When systemic insulin resistance develops, brain cells can become insulin resistant too, becoming effectively starved of glucose even when blood glucose levels are elevated. Research published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that elevated post-meal glucose was independently associated with a significantly increased risk of dementia in adults over 65, with a clear dose-response relationship. The higher the average post-meal glucose, the higher the dementia risk, independent of fasting glucose and HbA1c. The afternoon cognitive fog many adults over 60 experience 2 to 3 hours after lunch is in a significant number of cases the direct neurological consequence of the post-lunch spike and the subsequent glucose crash. Number 7. The 10-minute pre-meal timing is not a preference. It is a pharmacokinetic requirement. Research from bioscience, biotechnology, and biochemistry directly compared adults who consumed vinegar 5 minutes before a starchy meal, 10 minutes before, and simultaneously with the meal. The 10-minute pre-meal group had significantly lower post-meal glucose peaks than both the 5-minute and simultaneous groups. The acetic acid needs time to travel from the mouth through the esophagus and reach the stomach in sufficient concentration to activate amylase inhibition and begin GLUT4 pathway signaling before the carbohydrate load arrives. 5 minutes is insufficient. Taking it with the meal or after produces a dramatically reduced effect. Number 6. The form of apple cider vinegar matters, and the undiluted shot approach most people try leads to dropout within 2 weeks. Undiluted ACV is 5 to 8% acetic acid. Taken neat and repeatedly, it erodes tooth enamel through direct acid contact and causes esophageal irritation, particularly in adults over 60, whose esophageal mucosa is more sensitive than in younger adults. Research in the International Journal of Obesity found that a significant percentage of adults who tried daily undiluted vinegar shots reported esophageal discomfort and discontinued use within 2 to 3 weeks. 2 tablespoons in a full 8-ounce glass of water drunk through a straw. The straw minimizes tooth enamel contact. The dilution does not reduce the glucose-modulating efficacy. Number 5. Adding soluble fiber to the pre-meal drink creates an effect greater than ACV alone. Psyllium husk powder, 1 tablespoon stirred into the ACV water and drunk immediately before it gels, forms a viscous matrix in the stomach that physically slows carbohydrate digestion and glucose entry into the bloodstream. Research in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that pre-meal soluble fiber reduced post-meal glucose peaks by 20 to 30% independently. Combined with ACV, the mechanisms are additive. The acetic acid addresses the enzymatic and cellular uptake pathways. The fiber addresses the physical rate of digestion. Together, they produce superior post-meal glucose control compared to either intervention alone. I want to tell you about Margaret. Margaret was 71, a retired accountant from Phoenix, Arizona. Her doctor had flagged borderline fasting glucose at her last physical and told her to watch what she ate. She had watched carefully for 3 years. She had cut obvious sugars. She had reduced white bread and white rice. Her fasting glucose had dropped from 102 to 98, technically within normal range. Her doctor was satisfied. When I ran a 2-hour post-meal test after her standard lunch, her glucose peaked at 178 milligrams per deciliter at 45 minutes and was still 158 at the 2-hour mark, both readings well above the 140 target. She was spiking into pre-diabetic glucose territory twice a day, while her fasting glucose told her doctor everything was fine. We introduced the ACV protocol, 2 tablespoons of raw unfiltered ACV with the mother diluted in 8 ounces of water through a straw 10 minutes before lunch and dinner. 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk stirred in. Nothing else changed. Same meals, same portions, same activity. At 3 weeks, her repeat post-meal test showed a peak of 128 at 45 minutes and 112 at 2 hours, both below 140. The spike had been reduced by more than 50%. Her fasting glucose dropped from 98 to 91 over the same period. Her doctor at the next appointment noted her numbers were looking better and suggested whatever she was doing seemed to be working. Margaret told him about the protocol. He said that was interesting. This was not a miracle. This was slowing the glucose absorption from meals that had been producing spikes her standard labs were never catching, and the same correction is available to you. Number 4. A 10-minute walk after meals is one of the most powerful post-meal blood glucose lowering interventions available, and almost no one uses it deliberately. Skeletal muscle is the largest glucose sink in the human body. When muscle contracts, GLUT4 transporters activate in the muscle cell membrane independently of insulin through the same AMP kinase pathway that acetic acid activates. Contracting muscle absorbs glucose directly from the blood without requiring insulin to open the door. Research in diabetes care found that a 10-minute walk begun within 30 minutes of finishing a meal reduced the total 2-hour post-meal glucose area under the curve by 22% in adults over 65, 22% from a comfortable, low-intensity walk. Combined with the pre-meal ACV, the ACV blunts the initial spike and the walk accelerates the clearance. They address both the height and the duration of the post-meal elevation. Number 3. Post-meal blood sugar spikes are silently doubling the rate of kidney decline in adults over 60 with entirely normal fasting glucose. The kidneys filter approximately 180 liters of blood per day. Every time blood glucose spikes above 140, the glucose itself is toxic to the delicate nephron filtration units through a process called glomerulosclerosis, progressive scarring of the filtration membranes. Research published in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology found that adults over 65 with frequent post-meal excursions above 140 had kidney filtration rates declining at twice the rate of those with controlled post-meal glucose, even when fasting glucose was identical in both groups, twice the rate, from numbers that looked completely normal on the standard annual lab. Number 2. The complete evidence-based protocol. Raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar specifically labeled with the mother, which is the unfiltered bacterial culture that contains the majority of the bioactive acetic acid compounds. Not white vinegar, not clear filtered ACV. Raw, unfiltered, with the mother. 2 tablespoons in 8 ounces of water with a squeeze of fresh lemon if needed for palatability through a straw, with 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk stirred in. Finish 10 minutes before every main meal containing carbohydrates. If the meal is primarily protein and fat, with minimal carbohydrate, the pre-meal protocol matters less. The mechanism specifically targets carbohydrate digestion. Important cautions. Long-term daily ACV use can reduce potassium levels. If you take diuretics or heart medications, discuss this with your doctor. ACV also slows the absorption of some medications, so take any critical medications separately. And number 1, the most important thing to understand about blood sugar after 60, the damage is not happening in dramatic events. It is happening in the quiet hour after every single meal, every day, for years. In people with completely normal fasting glucose who have been told their numbers are fine. A comprehensive analysis published in Diabetes Care reviewed outcomes data from over 32,000 adults over age 65. Post-meal glucose variability, meaning the height and frequency of post-meal spikes, was a stronger independent predictor of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular events, and cognitive decline than any standard fasting glucose metric, stronger than HbA1c, stronger than fasting glucose, and the researchers found something even more striking. Adults in the highest quartile of post-meal spikes with normal fasting glucose had worse outcomes than adults with elevated fasting glucose who had well-controlled post-meal levels. Post-meal control was more protective than fasting glucose normalization. The standard of care measures the number that matters less and ignores the number that matters more. And the intervention that addresses the number that matters is 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in 8 ounces of water, 10 minutes before you sit down to eat. You are not broken. Your post-meal glucose response was broken. The information you were given was incomplete, and today you have the complete version. Let me tell you about James. James was 68, a retired civil engineer from Nashville, Tennessee, pre-diabetic on paper for 2 years. Fasting glucose 107, HbA1c 6.1. His doctor had recommended a low-sugar diet and discussed metformin as a next step if improvement did not come. James did not want metformin. He was a man who solved problems systematically, and he wanted to understand the mechanism before accepting medication. When I explained the post-meal spike as the primary driver, the problem became immediately clear to an engineer. He had been monitoring fasting glucose only. He had no pre-meal intervention. He ate lunch at his desk and went straight back to work with no post-meal movement. We introduced ACV with psyllium husk 10 minutes before lunch and dinner, and a 10-minute walk after each meal. Nothing else changed. At 3 months, his HbA1c had dropped from 6.1 to 5.7, his fasting glucose from 107 to 99. His post-meal readings were consistently below 130. His doctor held the metformin discussion pending continued monitoring. James told me the satisfaction was not just the numbers, it was that someone had finally explained the mechanism. 2 years of pre-diabetic status with no specific information about why or what to address. When the mechanism was explained, the solution was obvious to him. This was not a miracle. This was targeting the post-meal spike that was driving his metabolic trajectory before it crossed into medication territory. That same targeted approach is available to you. Here is your complete protocol. Specific, starting today. Step 1. Raw unfiltered ACV with the mother, 2 tablespoons and 8 ounces of water through a straw with 1 tablespoon of psyllium husk stirred in, 10 minutes before every main meal. This is the foundation. Step 2. A 10-minute walk within 30 minutes of finishing every main meal. Comfortable pace. The muscle contraction is the mechanism, not the intensity. Step 3. Eat protein, fat, and fiber before starch at every meal. Vegetables and protein first. Starch last. Research in diabetes care found this food order alone reduces post-meal glucose peaks by 37% independently. Step 4. Ask your doctor for a 2-hour post-meal glucose test at your next appointment. Target below 140 milligrams per deciliter. This gives you the number that actually reflects your metabolic health. Timeline. Within 1 to 2 weeks, most adults notice reduced afternoon energy crashes as the post-meal glucose swing is blunted. Within 4 to 6 weeks, measurable post-meal glucose reduction on home monitoring. Within 3 months, HbA1c improvement in adults with elevated baseline. 5 mistakes that undermine this protocol. Mistake 1. Taking the ACV with the meal or immediately before rather than 10 minutes before. The acetic acid needs the full 10-minute window to activate amylase inhibition and GLUT4 signaling before the carbohydrate load arrives. 5 minutes produces a markedly inferior result. Mistake 2. Using processed clear ACV without the mother. The mother contains the majority of the bioactive acetic acid compounds. Clear filtered ACV is significantly less effective. Mistake 3. Taking it undiluted as a daily shot. This erodes enamel and irritates the esophagus in adults over 60, leading to dropout within 2 to 3 weeks. 2 tablespoons and 8 ounces of water through a straw, every time. Mistake 4. Monitoring only fasting glucose and concluding the protocol is not working because that number has not changed much. Post-meal glucose responds before fasting glucose does. Fasting glucose is the last number to move. Check at the 2-hour post-meal mark. That is where the protocol's benefit is immediately visible. Mistake 5. Feeling that needing a nutritional tool to manage blood sugar represents personal failure. 40 to 45% of adults over 65 without any diagnosis have measurable insulin resistance. This is a physiological change in the aging body, not a character flaw and not an inevitable sentence. The mechanism is correctable. The tool costs $2. The research is robust. You are not broken. Your post-meal glucose response was broken, and today, 10 minutes before your next meal, you can begin correcting it. 10 points. Number 10. Post-meal glucose is the most important blood sugar marker and the least measured. Ask for a 2-hour post-meal test. Target below 140. Number 9. Spikes above 140 cause direct endothelial glycation and vessel wall damage at subdiabetic levels after every meal. Number 8. Post-meal spikes drive brain insulin resistance and the type 3 diabetes mechanism behind cognitive decline and afternoon fog. Number 7. The 10-minute pre-meal timing is pharmacokinetically necessary. 5 minutes produces inferior results. Number 6. Undiluted ACV erodes enamel and esophagus, leading to dropout. 2 tablespoons in 8 ounces of water through a straw always. Number 5. Psyllium husk added to the pre-meal drink creates a combined fiber ACV effect superior to either alone. Number 4. A 10-minute post-meal walk reduces the 2-hour glucose curve by 22% through insulin-independent GLUT4 muscle activation. Number 3. Post-meal spikes above 140 are doubling the kidney filtration decline rate in adults over 65 with normal fasting glucose. Number 2. Raw unfiltered ACV with the mother, diluted pre-meal with psyllium husk, 10 minutes before every carbohydrate-containing meal. And number 1. Post-meal glucose variability predicts cardiovascular events, cognitive decline, and mortality in adults over 65 more strongly than any fasting metric your doctor measures. The spike is the damage, and the spike is correctable today. Commit to just 3 things, starting with your very next meal. Get raw apple cider vinegar with the mother today. 2 tablespoons in 8 ounces of water through a straw, 10 minutes before your next lunch or dinner, and take a 10-minute walk within 30 minutes of finishing that meal. Just those 3, starting today. Your blood vessels are encountering glucose spikes after every single meal. Your brain cells are navigating that glucose environment with declining insulin sensitivity every day. Your kidneys are filtering blood that peaks above safe thresholds multiple times daily, and none of it has been visible on the lab your doctor runs once a year. The spike is the damage, and the spike is correctable with 2 tablespoons of vinegar and a 10-minute walk. You are not broken. Your post-meal glucose response was broken. The information you were given was incomplete, and today you have the complete version. Subscribe to this channel. I publish specific actionable information for adults over 60 every single week. Ring the notification bell. Type in the comments whether you have ever had a post-meal glucose test. Share this with one person whose doctor has told them their numbers are borderline and offered nothing more specific. Aging does not take away your body's ability to recover. It simply reminds you to care for it the right way. Take care of yourself.